Discussions. I'm Marlene Stein, and I'm super thrilled to have everybody here and to continue the conversation, and especially to be able to spotlight Canadian food leaders. Tonight, we're working with a chef, Carmen Ingham from the Wickaninnish Inn, as the executive chef, who's going to do a little seafood demo on sustainable seafood. And we're working with our partner this year, Emily De Sousa, who is a longtime champion of sustainable seafood, does a lot of incredible writing on the value of preserving and conserving our seafood ways, but also the cultural aspects of seafood consumption. Her family originally comes from the Azores, although she said it much differently about 5 minutes ago. And I was like, I need to catch that again because it's nothing I've ever heard and I'm dying to hear it. I'm also dying to go to the Azores. So there is that. But I'm going to turn it over to them. Emily and Chef Carmen, I'm going to ask you probably just to give everybody till about 5 after the hour, and then we'll get started if that's okay.
Okay, so thanks to everyone who's joining us so far. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to be part of the session. Thank you to Arlene and the entire Terroir team for making this happen again in a still crazy world that we're in. And I'm very excited to be here with Chef Carmen, who I know is going to cook up something amazing. I'm super excited to see it all come together. So yeah, my name is Emily De Sousa. I'm a sustainable seafood advocate, and I am going to be chatting with Chef Carmen today while he again demonstrates this really cool cooking demonstration. And Chef Carmen is the executive chef at the Point Restaurant at the Wickaninnish Inn in Tofino, British Columbia. The Wickaninnish Inn is actually also celebrating their 25th anniversary and are also incredible local and sustainable food champions. So very excited to be here with them today as well.
Thank you very much, Emily. It's great to be here. Great to be here in Tofino, but be able to connect with everyone virtually all over the country is very fantastic. Okay, well, I think I'm going to get started pretty soon here. The dish I wanted to make this evening is, we're talking about sustainability a lot. And so what I want to highlight was some of the sustainable seafood we have here in Tofino. For me, one of the best options really to highlight that type of thing is going to be working with bivalves. The bivalves we get, for the most part, they're farmed. We do get some wild ones as well, such as scallops and gooseneck barnacles. But the oysters, the mussels, the clams, those are all farmed. And a pretty incredible type of farming, really, considering the fact that they're not even really fed anything by anyone. It's just they're filter feeders that improve the environment around them. So for us, one of the first things that we should look to for sustainable seafood, especially in the wintertime when the fresh fish options start to decline a little bit. So this dish today is going to be some chilled chilled clams served in a bacon and pine mushroom dashi with a little bit of hackeri, turnip, and green apple. So the first thing we're going to do is start by steaming the clams. I've got these manila clams here. We're basically going to be cooking them very classically with some garlic, thyme, some leeks, and white wine. Taking them out of that broth and then adding some bacon, some pine mushroom trim, and some bull kelp to the broth, simmering that for a little while, and then finally seasoning with soy, mirin, and a little bit of rice vinegar. After that, we'll pick the clams, and then once they've all been chilled, begin plating them. So right now I've got a pot. It's just going on high heat. And add some of the clams.
Chef, I just have a quick question about buying clams. Is there anything that you should look for as a consumer? How can you tell, if they're fresh, if they're high quality? Is there any specific sort of things you should be looking for when buying clams at the grocery store?
Yeah, the first thing for me with any kind of shellfish in particular, I mean, you're going to want to smell them for sure. That's the first thing you want to do, but always look for something that when you pick it up, it feels heavier than it looks. You don't want to ever be surprised that something feels light when it comes to either oysters, clams, or mussels. That's kind of the golden rule for me.
Okay.
So I've got the clams in with the leeks, the thyme, the garlic. I'm going to add the white wine. Close the lid. And those will go for about 45 seconds or to a minute or so. Really not too long. As soon as the shells have opened, the clams are going to be fully cooked, and any time spent after that cooking, they're just going to overcook and start to become a little bit rubbery. So we really want to avoid that as much as we can. As the clams are cooking, I'm just going to jostle the pot a little bit, which encourages them to just cook a bit more evenly. Find the higher heat from the bottom of the pan all throughout the clams.
That's the one nice thing about seafood. It never takes very long to cook.
Oh, it's quick for sure, and it's something I don't really find it that, some people can be a little bit intimidating with cooking seafood. Maybe that's because there's the relatively, smaller margin for error compared to cooking meat. That said, though, like you mentioned, it's so fast.
Mhm.
You don't need a whole lot of time to get a dish like this ready to go, so it's a lot of fun. So again, once these clams are cooked, we're going to remove them, but leave all the nectar in the pot, and we're going to make a quick broth out of that. We like to use kelp a lot here at the Wick. It's really comes from all angles of us. We've got a bull kelp farm on the inlet, which is on one side of the Tofino Peninsula, and then obviously on the other side we have the Pacific Ocean, which a lot of it is harvested from as well. We're using bull kelp right now from Nos Fishery, which is a new kind of a kelp farm that we're starting to work with here in Tofino.
Super cool. What does like kelp do for a dish flavor wise? I've never actually had the opportunity to cook with kelp. I'm curious, like, how does it change a dish, like flavor, texture?
Different types of kelp can add a lot of body to a dish. You may have heard of something called agar-agar, which is just one example of kind of like a gelatin substitute, but something you can use as a vegan replacement for gelatin in a way to thicken things and add lots of different textures. So there's many different powders that chefs are using that are obtained from seaweeds, which is a great natural source for those types of things just for texture alone. And then when it comes to the flavor, really they add a lot of umami to a dish in terms of, making a vegetarian broth, things like that. We're going to put kelp in all of them for us. And then you'll find some of them will have, nutty flavors. Some are a bit more minerally focused. It's pretty big wide range of them, and they take very well to pickling, which is a great use of it for us too, because really you can't get most wild kelp products year long. Just like a lot of plants, they have a life cycle and are typically more available in the spring, summer, and early fall. But after that, they can always be dried, they can be pickled, lots of different uses for it in ways that you can make sure that's available for you year round.
Cool.
So the clams are just about ready. Going to give them about 1 more minute. If we find any clams that don't open, those ones are just going to get discarded. We're just going to focus on all the ones that open. Really, all the broth in there is great, though, and one of kind of the main aspects of this dish is making this chilled dashi. We make lots of different types of dashis, which really, in its essence, it's a broth made with kombu seaweed most typically, as well as bonito flakes, which is a kind of cured, dried, and smoked type of tuna. The smoke part of that can take many different forms for us. In this case today, I'm going to use some bacon. We cook our bacon every day. Whenever we have any excess bacon, we'll often use that for a broth to add some extra character like that. Bacon and clams are seen together often, so it's a pretty common pairing, I'd say, but then to see it in a broth is maybe a little bit different. So that's the type of thing we like to play with when we design our dishes, usually lots of familiar elements that are just presented in a slightly different way. So I'll remove all the clams now. Not really concerned if I'm taking the time or the leeks out. It can stay in there too. Again, to this pot, I'm going to add some bacon, some pine mushroom trim, and then a little bit of that bull kelp, and just reduce the heat to let it infuse for a little while. So that can cook for about 50 minutes or so. That's really all it's going to take. We like to use mushroom trim a lot. We go through a lot of mushrooms here. Tofino is well known as a mushroom hotbed. And if you go on some of the backlogging roads throughout the fall, you'll run into lots of different camps while people will be out picking for days and days, and then grab all the mushrooms, get them together in a refrigerated truck, and sell them to different distributors around the country, like Makuni or Ponderosa, things like that. There's probably at any given time in October, November, maybe 200 people out in the woods doing that kind of thing. It can be very lucrative business. For us, we get to benefit from it quite a lot. Just the variety of mushrooms we get here and the freshness of them, which is super important. It's pretty hard to beat. Something like a pine mushroom, when we get those in, we try to process them as quickly as possible. It really becomes one of the highest priorities to ensure just total optimal freshness with it. So basically for a pine mushroom, it can be anywhere from, the lower grade ones will be about $15 a pound to $50 a pound for the A grades, which typically a lot of them tend to get exported to countries like Japan. It's something that we want to celebrate here as much as possible. So we'll use them as much as we can during that season. So again, when we get the mushrooms in, we'll clean them all, spray them off, peel them, all of the trim that has the dirt removed. We'll often dry that or smoke that and turn it into a vinegar infusion, just making sure we get the most yield of it all. And so in this case, it's going into the mushroom broth. And then with the rest of the mushroom itself, depending on the grade, some of the lower grade ones, we might grate those and ferment them to make a puree out of, whereas the higher grade ones, we'll usually cook them sous vide just very quickly in order to pasteurize them and allow us to use them for the next week or so. So in this case, we've had some, for these pine mushrooms that we used earlier, these particular ones, these were basically tossed with 1% of their weight in salt, a small amount of soy, a little bit of sake, and then some wild ginger leaves from Salisbury Island, and then cooked at 80 degrees Celsius for about 10 minutes. And then from there, we'll use them for a wide range of applications over the next couple weeks.
Can you use any kinds of, any type of mushroom for these kinds of stocks, or do you recommend like a particular kind?
Yeah, for this really, anything works for a dish like this. I think if you were to buy something from the grocery store instead, probably shiitake would be the best substitute. Dried shiitake mushrooms are also pretty readily available too. And for something like a dashi, they're a great addition for any type of dashi. So towards the end of this cooking, we're going to season it with a little bit of soy, mirin, and rice vinegar. And then we're going to strain that broth essentially through a fryer cone, just making sure there's no solids whatsoever, and then chill it after that. What we're going to end up with is a broth with just a little bit of body that's obtained from that kelp. A lot of umami from the mushroom, a little smokiness from the bacon, and then the salinity from the soy is just kind of on the background there. So I have all of the rest of the ingredients here kind of pre-prepped, and so I can start to build this dish. This broth will stay for later. So I'll start with the clams, which have been picked and chilled. And just place them throughout the bowl. I'll only be placing a few tablespoons of broth in here. It's a pretty strong flavor, so I want to have the plate plated fairly widely. Next up here, we have some pork guanciale. So we get pigs in from Still Meadows Farm, which is in Machosen. The only way that we can get that pork is buying it whole. And for us, it's one of the key things in trying to serve meat sustainably is going whole animal as much as possible. And so the jowls we turn into guanciale, which is much like pancetta, cured pork product, and just kind of echoes that flavor that we have of the bacon in the broth a little bit.
Chef, is there any way to make this dish vegetarian? If you have somebody who doesn't eat bacon, is there another way to get those sort of smoky flavors in there without the meat?
Totally. I mean, the mushroom trim, you could smoke that. You could smoke onion slices, anything like that, that would work absolutely fine. This guanciale can be admitted for sure. Like most dashis do contain bonito, but smoking vegetables instead of using that bonito still using the kelp and seasoning with soy is going to give you a great result that I think we're going to keep a lot of vegetarians very happy. So next after that, we're going to put some of the turnip down. So this is Hakurai turnip, Japanese variety of turnip that we really like to use. This grows just about year round, and it's super versatile. It can be, shaved raw, has a nice peppery quality to it, kind of like a radish. But you can also roast it. You can ferment it and preserve it for months and months. It always goes really well with apple. We have some here, lightly pickled Granny Smith apple. For us, this is going to bring a good amount of acidity to the dish that otherwise just has, quite a few cleaner but umami forward flavors and a little bit of fat as well. We're going to add the pine mushroom slices next. And then after that, finally, the finished chilled broth. And then last thing is a little bit of seagrass to just give it a slightly bitter vegetal quality. So that's essentially the finished dish there. Again, clams served in a chilled pine mushroom and bacon dashi with Hakurai turnip and apple.
That looks pretty incredible.
Thank you.
It's impressive how quickly it came together. It looks super impressive, and you did that really quickly.
Yeah, really the only time kind of missing there was the time for the ingredients to chill. But it's the dish that really, it's perfectly in season. The mushrooms, the apples, the turnips, and clams that are really becoming to shine this time of year. It's like you said, it is quite easy to do. This could be done at home with pretty much no special equipment. There's no reason to sous vide cook mushrooms like that. Like we said, we could use dried shiitakes from the store. And yeah, it's a dish that to me, it's comforting, familiar in some ways, but also light and refreshing, which those are kind of the boxes we like to tick as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, I started mentioning earlier on that shellfish like this, I think, it's one of the best forms of aquaculture out there. We're getting some really promising news these days about getting the open pen fish farms out of our waters. The majority of MPs in BC voted to get those out in this past election, and so right now that's scheduled to happen around 2025. But I just want to talk a little bit about aquaculture in general, because I think it gets a bit of a bad name when that might not necessarily be the full truth of it. There's a lot of good aquaculture out here, a lot of closed containment farming, stuff like shellfish that I mentioned earlier. It's, to me, one of the things we really need to look at in terms of the sustainability of food in the future. But other things like open pen fish farms are something that we really need to stand firmly against. So yeah, that's why I wanted to highlight this ingredient here today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I was very curious to hear your thoughts on some of the aquaculture and sustainable seafood topics. I know BC is obviously quite a big talking point for those issues. So I'm glad that you brought up aquaculture. I also wanted to ask, like, maybe taking it back a step, how you got involved in sustainable seafood and interested in that world in the first place.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I'm from BC. I've always really cooked here. I've traveled around a little bit, but always come home and been proud to show off the food of British Columbia. But that pride also comes with this other kind of concern for, shedding too much light on some ingredients. I'm used to cooking in places here, like at the Wickaninnish Inn, also Sonora Resort, which was in the Discovery Islands, where we get visitors from all over the world that want to come and try the ingredients we're known for. And, Chinook salmon's probably the highest thing on that list, what they really want to try and eat, and eat as much as they can there. But I was feeling conflicted that, I wanted to serve it on one hand and celebrate this ingredient that I loved. But on the other hand, I realized that the stocks are declining so rapidly, and, I feel like have a responsibility to maybe not highlight that ingredient so much and try to present some different alternatives. Or when we do use it, make sure that it's really expressed how special it is, and to serve it in very small quantities, respect the whole product, and then do whatever we can to preserve its stocks and encourage their regrowth. Salmon in general, I look at all the different species there are, and talking about coho, for instance, where its numbers are a little bit better than Chinooks or sockeye, trying to use that as our salmon as much as we can. Those are measures we like to try to take whenever we can possibly do so. The Wickaninnish Inn recently joined a program called Get Wild, and essentially what that was is we guaranteed that we will no longer ever serve any farmed salmon. We had used a little bit of farmed salmon in the past, albeit organic farmed salmon from here in Tofino. That's quite a lot different than the Atlantic salmon that really does have the terrible name. But still, I think with open pen fish farms, there is no good answer. And so we've decided to only serve wild salmon whenever we are serving salmon at this point. So it's really, it started from wanting to always feel full pride with what we're serving, and not have any type of, remorse or regret over the idea that maybe this ingredient that we're celebrating so much could potentially be in decline, where it's, irreparable damage has been done to the stocks.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm curious as a chef, and from the restaurant perspective, like how you balance that, like wanting to showcase those local flavors and those things that the area is known for, with meeting that consumer demand, and then also taking into account these sustainability and maybe more ethical concerns. How do you I guess strike, and maybe you've already touched on this, but how do you strike a balance, I guess, between sort of the sustainable and ethical responsibilities you have to sustainable food sourcing, and then also upholding local food, that commitment to local food and meeting consumer demand for some of these flavors?
Yeah, I think that we have a surprisingly wide, diverse range of local ingredients here that I really like working with, and a lot of our guests might not be so familiar with. And we tend to think that, okay, we need to have these 4 fish on the menu that they know and recognize, or else they're not going to want to come to our restaurant. But I think that we're finding these days that people are really excited about figuring out something that's kind of new. And if we're able to show them an ingredient that comes from this area that they really didn't know about before, but might be in much better condition in terms of the supply chain, how much we have, and how sustainably produced it can be, I think that's an experience that we might undervalue, but they really take home with them and appreciate. And I think we're going to find that we really don't need to keep serving those, few things that are so championed and have stocks that are declining quite as much as we've had the feeling that we've had to in the past. There was a long period of time where we didn't serve salmon at all because of this exact reason. And for me, I kept nervously thinking, like, okay, when are the bad guest comments going to come in that where's the salmon? And it just wasn't happening. So I took that as a pretty big vote of confidence that we're on the right track with this idea, and just to try to be as diverse as we can in our offerings, and the guests are going to end up liking it.
Yeah, I think it's really uplifting and encouraging to hear you say that. I know myself, like one of the large things that I advocate for when it comes to sustainable seafood is diversifying and trying to get away from, the salmon, the tuna, the shrimp, the things that people always gravitate towards, and using things like local clams. And so I think it's very encouraging to hear that you are doing exactly that and having a lot of success with it. That kind of actually like segues nicely into the next thing I was wondering. I was curious about like the consumer education at the table. Like if you have people asking questions about, aquaculture, or, farm salmon versus wild salmon or local seafood, like are consumers sort of coming in with those questions, or curious about some of the things like the seafood products on the menu at all?
Yeah, we see a lot of questions about that kind of thing. We've actually, we made a little document here to give to our whole service team that really outlined in a lot of detail what all of our sources were, just where they are, how the methods of obtaining these fish, whether it was something that was farmed or the wild fish, the manner in which it's caught, exactly what waters it's coming from. We're not giving them the fisherman's name, but just about everything else that you could want in terms of that type of information. And it's funny, you don't really get the same questions so much. You barely get them with meat and with produce. Just a fraction of the time compared to what you do with seafood. And so guests are really curious about it, and they're much more, like I was saying before, willing to try different things than we ever really expected that they would be. So yeah, it's a really promising sign, and I think part of that, maybe it's been, we've seen so many more locals coming through this last couple of years. Obviously, restrictions have been lifted lately, but still over the past couple of years for us, it's been a lot of Canadian visitors, and they tend to be quite well informed, and I think maybe perhaps even more willing to try the things that are a little less common to them than what they've seen in the grocery stores before.
I definitely agree. I think if there's a silver lining in the last year and a half of craziness, it's that it pushed a lot of people out of their comfort zone, specifically with food. I know there was a big sourdough craze for a while and people trying different things at home. And yeah, like I was actually just going to ask like how the pandemic impacted that sustainability aspect. Like, are you finding more people are asking about that a little bit more now? Like they're more conscious of it? Has the last year and a half changed how you've approached sustainability at all?
I think with the last year and a half, I think with our food program, there hasn't been a huge amount of change in terms of sustainability. It's always been something that's important to me and important to the Wickaninnish Inn long before I got there. Sustainability to me, I think that the focus has really been changing a little bit more from food, and it's going to remain on food, but opening up to work-life balance and the way that we operate in a kitchen as a hospitality business. That's something that I think COVID has really forever changed our outlook on a lot of those different things. So many people, I think, in this industry, speaking for myself and others, that their sense of self and kind of their meaning has been so strongly tied to their work that when that work stopped for everyone, they were all really scratching their heads at what to do, and they felt quite lost. And I think we should try to move away a little bit from depending on work for our sense of being so much the way that we did before COVID. And I think a lot of people have kind of opened up their eyes to that. And just the idea of having a bit more leisure time, which has been maybe viewed in this industry as a weakness in the past, is something that we're really working against right now to try to make sure everyone is taking exactly what they need in terms of time off, and they're not putting too much pressure on themselves for their job, because I think we've seen that there's a different side of things than just working 15 hours a day all the time, and it's a much better side that we need to be open to, and that's a lesson that we need to keep in mind from now on. And I don't think we can really let that fade away after the pandemic. All the signs of it have otherwise left us.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's incredibly important. It's interesting to see, I guess, some of the silver linings, I guess, like the positive things that have come out of this when you force everybody to sort of take a step back and reevaluate and kind of, I don't know, sort of highlight some of the issues or the things that are wrong in these industries that maybe were very easy to ignore before because things were so quick and so fast paced that you could just overlook them. And when you actually were forced to pause, it's a, I think, really revealing moment. I think one of the other things that I noticed a lot, and I know myself in my own work, like was thinking about a lot, was this idea of local and local food. And I know that it's something that you're passionate about as well. And I know, like, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was all this craze and worry and anxiety over supply chains and stockpiling of different things, and this sort of realization that maybe the globalized supply chains aren't necessarily always reliable as we think that they are. And I'm curious about like how this idea of local or shortened supply chains or local food ties into sustainability, and how do you think those two are connected, if at all?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's really shone a big light on some of the issues with globalization and some of the downsides and negatives that right now, if we're relying on doing things that way, we don't really have a good answer to. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there who believe that this is going to be the last pandemic for the next few hundred years and we don't have to worry again. I think a lot of people are thinking, well, we need to do things differently now. This could be the reality. And so just, yeah, exactly like you said, trying to minimize what we do with globalization in terms of how we rely on the ease of mass-produced things from faraway places, and the lower costs that can be associated with that now. That you're paying in something else if you're not paying in money, and trying to do things, being self-sufficient in a region has a lot more safety to it, and really being safe right now when it comes to food security or health or whatever it is, that's at the it's the utmost priority. And so I really do believe that being local, besides just something that's trendy, is the way we need to operate in order to kind of guarantee ourselves a safer future when it comes to the potential disruption of supply chains that we're relying on right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think maybe just one last question to kind of tie all that together, given the theme of this year's Terroir Symposium being recovery and resilience, and thinking about sustainability and things like that, I'm curious how do you think that sustainability and some of the sustainable practices that you've been using in your own work, how can those things contribute to the recovery and future resilience of the hospitality industry?
I think, like I was kind of mentioning before, just really focusing on thinking about, is this job that we're asking an individual to do, whether it's a dishwasher, a server, a cook on your night team, whatever it is the current ask for them sustainable? Are they working at a rate that they can continue to work at over a long period of time, and maintain mental health and happiness and all that kind of thing? And like you kind of mentioned earlier, I think we were going so fast for the longest period of time that we didn't have the time to stop and consider that. And so, there's not a lot of easy answers to it, but I think it's just a question that we need to continue to always be asking ourselves right now: is this, particular job for this person sustainable? And if it isn't, what can we do to make it that way? Do they have the tools that they need? Do they have the support that they need? And then, looking back towards a bit more just food itself again, trying to make sure that if we're focusing on local food, instantly that's going to be a more sustainable option than something that's going to take greater carbon emissions to arrive here from halfway around the world. And we do have to import some things. We're not going to get away from that completely. And sustainability to me is really on a sliding scale. It's not a question of are you sustainable or are you not in your practices. It's what can you do? What are the small steps that you can take to kind of increase your level of sustainability? We're probably always going to be using lemons and limes. And they're not coming from Vancouver Island. We have to bring those in. But if we can be making sure that all the produce comes from the island, that's a big step in the right direction. And if we can make sure that we're never using any kind of open pen farmed wild salmon, that's another big step in the right direction too. So yeah, there's lots of small things that we can do all the time, and really just continuing to ask ourselves whether it's a question in terms of purchasing food, where it's coming from, or when we're writing our schedules for our team members, is this sustainable? Just asking that all the time, I think, is really the biggest key.
Yeah, I think that was a really great response. Important to think about the social sustainability as well as the environmental. Thank you.